I have an interesting relationship with the Killzone franchise. I remember before Killzone 1 came out and Sony was dubbing it the quote-unquote Halo killer, yet it was really disappointing and the general public reception was just not really very good. Killzone 2 and 3's public reception was amazing. Everyone thought this was the genre-defining FPS of the time on the PS3, but when I played it, I just found Killzone 2 and 3 to be greatly overrated. Generic brown military shooters that didn't do anything innovative or new, definitely not genre-defining, but competent shooters nonetheless that you could play and enjoy, consistent throughout the entire game. Killzone Shadow Fall, however, has a pretty negative reception. Not so much that people are saying it's a 1 out of 10 game, but most people seem to be somewhat disappointed. The first half of this game I didn't understand, I was enjoying it. But as time went along, things didn't end up so well. Graphics are the one thing I really can't fault Shadowfall for. The game looks astounding. The art direction looks amazing. This brings back what we really saw in the first Killzone game. Killzone 1 may not have been a very good game, but just look at the art design. The weapons were incredibly cool, the lore around the game was really interesting, and you genuinely were invested in seeing what was going on at the Helghast. There were interesting, unique enemies. The planet was an interesting place. You wanted to know more that was going on. Killzone 2 and 3 didn't really share this, and the art direction was a little lacking compared to the first game. Shadowfall, on the other hand, does not go down this route, and it brings back the interesting art style of the first game. It's not exactly like the first game, but it's intriguing, and you do want to look at it. And the graphics are so good that you just kind of want to stare and continue to look at it for a while. Shadowfall is particularly good when it comes to world building, both in the Helghast controlled areas and the ISA controlled areas. Now, you are still playing on console, so you have the console limitations. Anti-aliasing is not the best, so you do see jaggies around everything. The FOV could be a little bit better, although not as awful as the previous Killzone games, and the frame rate does kind of jump all over the place at times, but again, nowhere near as bad as Killzone 2 and 3. It's a much more playable experience from a technological standpoint, and it kind of needed to be. This is a launch title for the PS4, and needs to be a tech demo. And at least in this regard, it's quite good. I really don't have many faults, which is more than what I can say about the story. The story is an illogical, incoherent mess, full of plot holes and nothing motivating. I heard quite a few different people complaining that the game starts very slow. The beginning of the game is about 15 to 20 minutes of just interactive cutscenes or non-interactive cutscenes. And you know, I usually don't care about this. Hell, some of my favorite games start incredibly slow. Half-Life is a great example. Sitting in that tram just looking around you forever before you're finally able to play. And even when you get out of the tram, you gotta walk around and just kind of take in the environment first. And this is great the first time you play it, but it really kills replayability. That said, I wouldn't want them to remove it because this is them setting up the game. And the same thing could be said for Shadowfall. The beginning of a game is setting up the game, both in story and gameplay, so I don't mind it starting a little bit slow. Unfortunately, unlike Half-Life 1, the intro in Shadowfall fails at what it wants to do. The intro has two different goals. The first one is to set up the world you inhabit. This doesn't make a whole lot of sense. The game starts 30 years in the future after the end of Killzone 3, where you created mass genocide and destroyed the Helghan planet, where they understandably wouldn't be happy about that, so what do? You give the refugees part of your planet, Vecta. This turns into a situation of them controlling half of the planet, you controlling the other half, and there being a big wall between you two, because why the hell would you think this would end in any other way? This is the stupidest setup to a world. It does not make any damn sense as to why you would do this. I get the whole point is to set up a Cold War scenario type thing, but it's so amazingly dumb that I can't help but laugh at it, especially since it's set up in literally a 15-minute intro. The second point of this intro is to set up who you're playing as and his backstory. You play as Lucas Kellen, a main character so forgettable that I had to go look up his name. The story starts with Lucas and his father trying to evacuate the now Helghan-controlled part of Vecta, and his father dying. Not a spoiler, this happens within the first 10 minutes. At this point, you're an orphan basically pulled into the ISA's forces and become a Shadow Marshal. This is the point where I really start complaining about how this is set up, because the game does this sort of time-lapse of over 30 years. It's the taboo of where they tell you something, but they don't show you something. Let me play through some of this. Let me actually figure out the character. You can't just tell me that suddenly, hey look, you're an orphan, you're pulled in, now you're some trained military person that's super important. I haven't seen that. It's basically a time lapse. This doesn't tell me much. This doesn't get me invested in the main character. This is all made even worse by the first few levels. Everyone steps out of your way and salutes you as if you're this huge important character, but again, I haven't seen why I'm supposed to be so important. That would be like if you played Half-Life 2, but Half-Life 1 didn't exist and everyone regarded Gordon Freeman as they regard him in Half-Life 2. But without the events of Half-Life 1, this makes no sense. Unfortunately, the rest of the story makes about as much sense as the intro does. At some point in the game, you come across an agent on the other side, a Helgen agent, who apparently is only half Helgen or so. To make things brief, you eventually team up with her, and her idea is to try to make everything peaceful and make everyone stop fighting and to end the war that way, even though when you first met her, it just happened right after a major terrorist attack to the capital city on the ISA side, so why would this ever work? At one point she even says, "I wish everyone would just forget what happened in the past," as you were standing on the crumbling planet of Helgen, completely desolate, buildings falling apart, no one lives here anymore. It's like, bitch, this used to be your race's home planet. You think people are just gonna forget mass genocide? Their motivations don't make a lot of sense, nor does their attempts at stopping the war. This makes even less sense for the main character, because the main character was an orphan that was raised to be part of this military. Why would he suddenly just drop the military and go with her? All the while, the main leader of the ISA military comes across as this generic racist all Helgen are bad type, and of course, takes it as a betrayal and a lack of trust when you decide to not side with his side, but also not side with the Helghast side, just as someone you can't trust. Major spoiler coming up here, not that it really matters, the story is awful in this game. The end of the game basically ends with that leader killing you. Shooting in the head. Game ends. There you go. Credits. But hold up, it's not actually done. There's one more stealth level, joyous stealth level, everyone loves those, where you play as the agent on the other side, assassinating the ISA leader, and then the game truly ends. What fucking ending is this? It doesn't conclude anything. It just, oh look, you killed the main character, now get revenge on killing this person. The war isn't over. It didn't solve anything. There's so many plot holes. The setup makes no sense at all, nor does the ending. How is this supposed to feel fulfilling? The story really does feel like a waste of time. You set up this world very briefly, kind of have some stories in the middle of it, meet a new character, people die, and then it ends. How did all the things I did across the course of the game change anything? Both sides are still at war, no one seemed to have gotten the upper hand, and you getting shot in the head is supposed to be a satisfying ending. Now all of this I wouldn't really complain about so much if they put all their time into the gameplay. I'm kind of an old school type of person. If a game has basically no story or an awful story yet has amazing gameplay, I'm still going to love the hell out of that game. Rainbow Six Vegas 2 is a great example of that. But when I start complaining is when the story starts interfering with the gameplay, dragging it down with it. And Killzone Shadow Fall unfortunately does this exact thing in the second half of the game.
Oh shit. The power of the sun compels you. Jesus Christ.
When I first started playing Shadowfall, I was a little bit confused as to why everyone hated it. The game actually starts great from a gameplay perspective, and it was genuinely more fun than the games that came before it. One of the major reasons I was so confused as to why people really liked Killzone 2 and 3 is that they just seemed to go full pace all the time. Pacing was awful in Killzone 2 and 3. They were more akin to a Call of Duty campaign with enemies constantly pouring out at you, and the NPCs constantly yelling at you to do something. It was almost as if Killzone 2 and 3 thought that people were so ADD that if they weren't shoving things at your face all the time, you wouldn't pay attention. Shadowfall thankfully stopped doing this. Pacing is way better in this game, and it shows in the first few levels. The first few levels are designed in a way that are a little more open, that let you approach situations however you want to. Clown closets of enemies are gone. There are patrols of enemies that you can take out either stealthily or you go full on Rambo, or maybe a little more methodically. These lend themselves to a lot of replayability, and they are exactly what I look for in a shooter. It reminds me more of, say, Fear 1. Give me a combat arena, and let me go at my own pace however I want to. This is incredibly enjoyable, and again, very replayable. The first half of the game or so plays like this. There's no coincidence that the levels they showed at E3 were these types of levels, say the forest level. Not only is it graphically beautiful, but again, it really shows the more open-ended variant of Shadowfall while still feeling like Killzone. On top of all of this, the guns feel so good. Easily, these guns feel better than any other guns in the entire franchise. They have amazing sound effects that sound like actual guns, good recoil, and in general, there's a lot of polish to the gunplay and movement. The one complaint I do have about the weapons, however, is that they basically went back down to how Killzone 2 did it, which is not a good thing. You can only carry 2 guns in this game, and one of them you can never drop. You have this laser gun at any given moment, and the gun itself is effective and kinda cool. You can turn it from an automatic to a railgun type sniper, so it's not bad to have, but again, you can't drop it. So this basically means you can only carry one gun throughout the entire campaign, and you're stuck with this laser gun, which again isn't a bad backup, but still, I want more variety than just having to have one gun. I have absolutely no clue why they would do this. They learned in Killzone 3 that carrying 3 guns is a better idea. Why would they go back? If they wanted to do this, why didn't they just make it so this laser gun had its own dedicated slot, and then you can carry 2 other guns as well? The fact that I was always stuck with this thing made me not really want to use it, which is not a good thing. But with all of that said, you do still have some other tools. For example, you now have a drone called the Owl, which can do 4 different things. The first mode is to just set it out there and let it go attack something. The second mode is to use it as a zipline for faster movement. The third mode is to put a shield in front of you, which I didn't actually use this very much, but it does seem useful. And the fourth mode is sort of an EMP blast, which is very useful. The interesting way about controlling this drone is that in order to select what mode you want it to be in, you have to swipe on the little touchpad on the DualShock 4. This is actually a pretty clever thing to do because this allows you to effectively have more buttons on a controller than what you actually have. If you didn't have this touchpad, you probably would have had to bring up a dial, which slowed down gameplay and really gets in the way. Instead, this is a clever workaround that doesn't slow the pace of the game and is pretty easy to do. The game does give you some other abilities, like the ability to sort of pulse and see things through walls, kind of like, say, Promethean Vision in Halo 4, and this is actually a very useful ability because the way the maps are laid out are much better than previous games. The maps are not so straightforward anymore. Again, it's more of a combat arena, so it does feel more replayable and you can approach things in different ways, but so can the enemy. The enemy doesn't just run straight at you in a straight line anymore. You frequently will find yourself in a position that leads to having enemies behind you or to your left or in different directions that you weren't originally anticipating. And this is actually great. It is more dynamic and more fun. It makes the game feel a lot less like a generic shooting gallery. And all of this left me confused as to why people hated this game so much, until I got to Chapter 7. It's very confusing because it feels like Chapter 7 was made by an entirely different developer. The game stops being so dynamic and it starts relying more on trial and error sequences, like you falling and having to avoid landing on certain objects that would kill you, leaving you not really knowing where you're supposed to land to begin with, and ending up in you dying numerous times not knowing what the hell you were doing wrong. And then you start getting into the very frequent defense sections with enemies constantly pouring out of you and you not really progressing anywhere. These aren't fun. Along with some other taboos like a random stealth mission here and there that really don't have any place in Killzone. I would at least give them credit if they did these stealth missions well, which they didn't, especially the one right at the end of the game, leaving you frustrated right as you beat the game, making you not want to play it again. And really, every taboo that you don't want in a shooter, that a shooter should never do, is here, including an escort mission, and the person you're escorting ends up dying anyway. What the fuck was the point? The game is also awful at telling you what you're supposed to do or where you're supposed to go. If you press up on the D-pad, it's supposed to give you a nav point telling you where to go, not necessarily what to do, so you're still confused, and this nav point doesn't really help you anyway, because a lot of the time it'll put the nav point exactly where you need to go, and maybe that's a floor below you, so you don't know how the hell you're supposed to get to that nav point, just that you're supposed to end up there somehow. The cover system is just as useless, if not worse, than the previous Killzone games. It features the same annoying controls of just crouching next to a wall suddenly sticks you to cover, so now you're stuck there even if you want to get off of cover, and to make things worse, everything seems to be put on the O button. Crouch on the O button. Taking cover, O button. Action, O button. Half the times you want to do something, like open a door quickly because people are shooting at you, but instead you just crouch in front of it and then you die. Or maybe you take cover instead, which is just as bad because you take cover and to you, you're completely fine. You're behind cover. You can't be seen. Yet somehow their bullets still hit you. The cover is fucking useless. It's like all the cover in this game is just high enough so that the very top of your head is exposed, but obviously your eyes aren't at the top of your head, so you can't see that. You just know you're getting shot and you can't go anywhere because you're still behind cover in your mind. This game just would have been 100% better if the cover system didn't exist and if they didn't put crouch and action on the same button. And then you start getting into enemies that are just not enjoyable to fight and are genuinely annoying instead. For example, enemy spawners. Joy. Everyone loves enemy spawners. You have these robots that spews out spider bots that run at you and blow up. It's not too hard to get rid of these because you can just have your drone hack it, but this is not enjoyable. It's annoying to have these spider bots spawn out of places you didn't see while you're trying to fight other enemies. Or these spider bots alerting everyone around you because you happen to walk too close to one of them that you didn't see. Then on top of this, you have enemies that have shields that you have to take down. This is not really a problem in something like, say, Halo, because you also have shields, but when you don't have shields, this just means the enemy has more health than you do, and that's fucking obnoxious. I believe this is why they force you to keep the laser gun, because the sniper railgun sort of way of firing it gets rid of the shields. Again, there are solutions to all of these problems that they put into your face, but they're not enjoyable. They're annoying, and the game starts feeling very tedious, as if they're trying to pad out the second half of the game. So much of this game feels like trial and error. So much of the game is defined on these levels that feel like trial and error, because that frustration is all you are going to remember when you think about replaying this game. This is what I mean by the story starts to kind of blend into the gameplay and drag it down. Everything that happens in the second half of the game is happening just to kind of set up what's going on with the story instead, as if they wanted to just wrap the game up and they ran out of time. I don't really know how to end this. Graphically it's amazing, story it's awful, gameplay is very hit or miss. Sometimes it was some of the most fun I've had with a shooter, and then other times it was so frustrating that I just didn't want to play it. For me, it's more of a case of what could have been. The gunplay, the movement, everything is there, the groundwork is built up, but it's mismanaged so poorly that it's not really a good game. This game was the butt of many PS4 has no game jokes back in the day, and I kinda see why. It is certainly not worth buying a PS4 to play Killzone Shadow Fall. If this was maybe a $15, $20 game on PC and you probably already have a PC, then I would say yeah, go play it. It's not completely 100% terrible. You can get some enjoyment out of some of the levels, but it's certainly not worth a PS4 over. Although a friendly note and something I will probably be making a video on in the future is that I actually played this game on PS Now. I don't own a PS4, and PS Now has a 7-day free trial, so you probably will beat Killzone Shadow Fall in 7 days if you're really curious enough to play it for free. Just note that when you sign up for PlayStation Now, it will turn auto-renewal on. Make sure to turn this off immediately. That scummy Sony, knock that off. Same thing to you, Microsoft. Every time you renew Xbox Live, turning the auto-renewal on, fuck that shit, stop doing it. While this video ended up being a lot more negative than I intended it to be, I guess the point was that Shadowfall just had a lot of potential that it didn't consistently keep. At times it really showed it, but not consistently. It's not really very good. Well, that about sums up everything involving Killzone Shadow Fall. Huge thanks goes out to my patrons over on Patreon. If you guys don't know, I have a few rewards on Patreon. One of them is to join us in a Patreon or Twitch sub-stream twice a month, and the other one is to get early access to my videos. That one's the cheaper one, so if you want to come help me out, that's the reward you'll be getting. Huge thanks to everyone that does help me. And again, if you want to check out my Twitch, it's twitch.tv/Jarek4GameDragon. I stream very often. Thank all you guys for watching, and I will see you over on my Twitch.